Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you as always for stopping by. Let me start with some macro thoughts. The Fed cut 25 basis points as expected, and Fed funds is now in the range of 1.5 to 1.75%. Uncertainties remain. We'll assess appropriate rate path. And obviously, I think the market does not expect a further rate cut this year, but expects one next year. I'll come to my perspective, which is now flipped, and I think we sell the dollar and we buy risk assets across the board. US GDP grew just 1.9% on an annualized basis in the third quarter, versus 1.6% growth expected. Northman Trader, in his normal cryptic style, said July cut, September cut, October cut, the economy is in a good place. Markets took a dovish pivot as Powell signals no rate hikes until inflation rises significantly. The dollar dropped. I'm expecting it to drop further. The Dow jumped 100 points, and US 10-year yields dropped to 1.77%. But I don't like the long end of the global bond markets at all. I'm a seller there on any further rebounds. Look at this. Behold the Argentina 100-year bond. This bond was actually oversubscribed when it was sold. And that took me back to my favorite quote from the Bible, Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. And whoever tells you that markets are efficient, you can show them this century bond from Argentina. Home thoughts, and that was just breakfast. This is from the Izu Peninsula via Agnes C. Poirier, and it looks absolutely delicious. Pablo Picasso via the Saatchi Gallery. Everything you can imagine is real. He's seen here in his studio in Cannes in 1956. This is Donald Rodney's How the West Was Won, which he painted age 21 in 1982. That's via the Tate. Rodney was part of the BLK Art Group, a group of young black artists formed in 1979 who raised questions about what black art was and what it could become in the future. Political reflections. Will Donald Trump be impeached in his first term? The current yes forecast on Predict It is 78%, which is an extremely high probability. The hefty agricultural purchases Trump is asking for are market distortive, Lamb Hale said. China is telling Trump they are just not feasible. The Commerce Ministry spokesman Gao Feng told reporters on October the 17th that China would increase US farm purchases based on domestic demand and market principles, while the US would provide favorable conditions. US farmers watched their exports plummet after the trade war started, and they've been the soft underbelly of this trade war. And I previously wrote about how China had struck at Trump. That was on the 26th of August, when I touched on the farm economy and on the fact that the currency was the vehicle with which China was responding to Trump. And now we've had quite a sharp rally. We're now below 704, it's 703.50, and that's signaling and a global appetite for riskier assets as well. The Financial Times has an extraordinary expose inside the WhatsApp hack, how an Israeli technology was used to spy. And earlier this year, Faustin Rukundo's phone started to ring at odd times. The calls were always on WhatsApp, sometimes from a Scandinavian number, sometimes a video call, but the caller would hang up before he could answer. When he rang back, no one would pick up. Missed WhatsApp calls were more ominous. Powered by technology built in Israel, the calls were a harbinger of Pegasus, an all-seeing spyware so powerful that the Israeli government classifies it as a weapon. Developed and sold by the Herzliya-based NSO Group, which is part-owned by a UK-based private equity group called Novalpina Capital, Pegasus was designed to worm its way into phones such as Mr. Rukundo's and start transmitting the owner's location, their encrypted chats, travel plans, and even the voices of people the owners met to servers around the world. WhatsApp quickly closed the vulnerability and launched a 6-month investigation into the abuse of its platforms. The probe, carried out in secrecy, makes apparent for the first time the extent and nature of the surveillance operations that NSO has enabled. So quite an extraordinary story about an unmistakable pattern of abuse the Facebook-owned business has said. Turning to the Indian Ocean, in an article I came across in Global Research, whoever attains maritime supremacy in the Indian Ocean would be a prominent player on the international scene. That's the US Navy geostrategist Rear Admiral Alfred Thayus Mahan. In May 2018, acting as a US proxy, the UAE established a military base on Socotra Island, seizing control of both Socotra's airport and seaport. The Yemeni archipelago of Socotra in the Indian Ocean is located some 80 kilometers off the Horn of Africa and 380 kilometers south of the Yemeni coastline. The islands of Socotra are a wildlife reserve recognized by UNESCO as a World Natural Heritage Site. Socotra is at the crossroads of the strategic naval waterways of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. It is of crucial importance to the US military. According to this article, among Washington's strategic objectives is the militarization of major seaways. This strategic waterway links the Mediterranean to South Asia and the Far East through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. A major transit route for oil tankers, a large share of China's industrial exports to Western Europe transits through this strategic waterway. Maritime trade from East and Southern Africa to Western Europe also transits within proximity of Socotra through the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. A military base in Socotra could be used to oversee the movement of vessels, including warships, in and out of the Gulf of Aden. The Indian Ocean is a major sea lane connecting the Middle East, East Asia and Africa with Europe and the Americas. It has 4 crucial access waterways facilitating international maritime trade. That is, the Suez Canal in Egypt, the Bab el-Mandeb bordering Djibouti and Yemen, the Straits of Hormuz bordering Iran and Oman, and the Straits of Malacca bordering Indonesia and Malaysia. These choke points are critical to world oil trade as huge amounts of oil pass through them. From a military standpoint, the Socotra archipelago is at a strategic maritime crossroads. The proposed US Socotra military facility is not limited to an Air Force base. A US naval base has also been contemplated. The establishment of a US military base in Socotra is part of the broader process of militarization of the Indian Ocean. The latter consists in integrating and linking Socotra into an existing structure, as well as reinforcing the key role played by the Diego Garcia military base in the Chagos archipelago. The US Navy's geostrategist Rear Admiral Alfred T. Mann had intimated prior to the First World War that whoever attains maritime supremacy in the Indian Ocean will be a prominent player on the international scene. This ocean is the key to the 7 seas in the 21st century, and the destiny of the world will be decided in these waters. And that's why I said in August 2013, I have no doubt that the Indian Ocean is set to regain its glory days. Andrew Coribico, the Indian Ocean region is expected to become the geostrategic center of gravity in the new Cold War. And then recently I wrote in August 2018 about the Indian Ocean economy in a port race. And then finally, this is a gentleman called Ali the Navigator who took us to Wasini Island, which of course is on the Indian Ocean, some years ago when we were on the coast. My article over the weekend was called From Russia with Love. Just to take you through some of the key points, Putin said our African agenda is positive and future-oriented. And I said Putin's linguistics are an art form. And I was talking about him probably bringing up a photo of Gaddafi dead, referencing the bottle, and then showing a photograph of Bashar Assad alive and asking every African leader, what's the difference? And I reckon that every single deal he wished for was signed within seconds of him doing exactly that. And I said once we look through the optics of 2 nuclear-capable supersonic bombers landing in Pretoria, then we need to see this Russia-Africa summit move for what it is. It is meaningful. Where Z is fed up and speaks about the end of vanity because the ROI outside commodities and telecoms for China is negative, Putin, I said, has created a hybrid model with an exponential ROI. I would imagine he is on speed dial. I quoted Andrew Coribico, who spoke about Russia's political technologists who have reportedly devised bespoke solutions for confronting incipient and ongoing color revolutions. And to that point, there is a very interesting article in the New York Times called A New Message: Russia Trains Its Propaganda Machine on Africa. The Russians have their own way of thinking different from the Western patterns, Mr. Matamulani said. I used to tell people Russians are nothing else than white Africans, white blacks. Russia started to set up a low-profile infrastructure of political influence that bears echoes of the Kremlin strategy in Europe and the United States. It is already identifying African politicians and activists who will carry its message, deploying its international propaganda arms, the television channel RT and the Sputnik news agency. The Kremlin is honing this message. While Western Europe and the United States are continuing a centuries-old tradition of exploiting Africa, Moscow is ready to engage with Africa on mutually beneficial terms. This gentleman, Matumulani, runs a think tank called Afric, which describes itself on its website as funded by donors with a common passion to foster Africa's development without mentioning Russia. Speaks to a political candidate, Mamadou Koulibaly, a candidate for president of the Ivory Coast in elections next year. I will ask them if they can introduce me to people with money who will help me. This is important. A campaign needs money. Very simple man, cool is how Mr. Owusu described Mr. Putin, who held a brief meeting at the conference with the heads of 11 African news agencies. Mr. Vollen said RT was ready to provide its suite of documentaries to African TV stations in addition to animal movies. You remember the story about the CAR lion and the Russian bear that comes to its rescue. The library includes features like Drift It, like Putin's Driver, and Coups Are Us, American regime changes and their aftermaths. Perhaps the most prominent figure in Russia's Africa push is Yevgeny Prigozhin, the St. Petersburg businessman indicted by the United States for running the online troll farm that sought to sway the 2016 American presidential election, who is said to run a military contractor called Wagner that is involved in several African countries. Russia, the yearly volume of its trade with Africa has doubled to $20 billion over the last 5 years, but that pales into comparison to Africa's $300 billion in trade with the European Union and $60 billion with the United States in 2018. Russia is trumpeting itself as a protector of traditional values, whilst also seeking to capitalize on Russia's Cold War past, when the Soviet Union sought to ally itself with opponents of post-colonial influence on the continent. Our cooperation is rooted in the period of the joint fight against colonialism, is strategic and long-standing, Putin told dozens of African leaders in Sochi. And then talking about various different folks who've come to evangelize the Russian message. Foundation for National Values Protection, a website available in English and French, argues that African countries are vulnerable to the same sort of Western meddling that Russian officials say undermined former Soviet republics like Georgia and Ukraine. We have to fight the narrative that because Russia is involved, it's bad. Major elections loom next year across Africa, including in Ghana, Burkina Faso, Burundi. Obviously, they're going to get involved. So a very interesting article, New York Times. Have a look. This is a photograph of Russia Today studios from that article. This is a photograph of Putin posing for a photo with the heads of African news agencies on the sideline of the summit. And that takes me back to a number of articles I wrote. September 2012, I was quoting something from an US Army journal. Information warfare will not be couched in the rationale of geopolitics, but will be spawned like any Hollywood drama out of raw emotions, hatred, jealousy, and greed. Emotions rather than strategy will set the terms of information warfare struggles. It's December 2016, when I was writing about this influence operation that I believe moved the needle in favor of Trump. I said Putin has proven himself an information master, and his adversaries are his information victims. In an article about Facebook, I said I was quoting Andrew Nix, it's no use fighting elections on the facts, it's all about emotions. So the candidate is the puppet, the undercover reporter asked. Always, replied Nix. Mims, who I follow on social media, says, I have zero sympathy for the argument that big tech is a neutral communication platform, so it's people who are the real problem. And I also said, in an extraordinary boomerang, the US's adversaries have turned social media on its head and used it as a Trojan horse via psychographic profiling and micro-targeting at a mass scale, and they're applying that into Africa, obviously. Let's move to the currency markets. Euro dollar 111.66. I'm now bullish the euro. Dollar index 97.307. I want to sell the dollar index. Japanese yen 108.56. Swiss franc 0.9872. The pound 129.45, headed towards 130. The Australian dollar 0.6917, headed towards 70. India rupee 70.77. South Korean won 1163.41. The rial below 4 at 398.78. Egyptian pound, which has probably been the best trade of the year, 16.1255. South African rand got hammered, and that's trading around 15. Dollar index chart, I think you sell it now aggressively. Euro dollar, this chart is from FX Pip Titan, buy it. Sterling, another chart from FX Pip Titan, who's talking about upper resistance at 130.10. I think whatever happens in the UK run up to the election, that's a buy as well, and we're probably going to 134 now. As I said in August 2019, the most important currency to watch remains the renminbi. It is a big signifier for market risk appetite, and it keeps strengthening. It's at the highest level since September 13. This is a chart from JS Blockland. We're currently at 703.35. Looks like we're headed below 7. Standard Chartered gets boost where Hong Kong Shanghai Bank flagged setbacks, is showing strength. Lender generated 19% more revenue in Europe and the Americas in the third quarter, regions where HSBC flagged as disappointing this same week. 2% increase in revenue from Greater China and North Asia sent adjusted pre-tax profit up 16%. Defying analysts' predictions for a slight decline. So they've done tremendously well. Our strategy of the last few years has progressively created a stronger and more resilient business, Bill Winters said. Continuing execution of that strategy remains our priority, enabling us to face the more challenging external environment confidently. I can't agree more with what he's saying. He's really done well. However, speaking in an interview with Bloomberg Television, the bank's CFO, Andy Halford, said a number of clients were looking to set up additional accounts, but added the bank had yet to see significant outflows of money from Hong Kong. It's not big time, but it is a number of clients that are looking to do that. So that's an interesting development. Here in Africa, they're making a very big digital virtual bank play. And they were visiting actually last week in Nairobi, and I met with some of the senior officials, and they were very bullish, I must say. Look at this pairs trade that the market ear is referencing us to, Beyond versus Tesla. Tesla, I must say, has dumbfounded me. It's been an extraordinary short squeeze of epic proportions by Elon Musk. It really has. Commodity markets, look, gold, yes, just crossing 1500. That's another very big buy, in my opinion. I think that's going to go and test 1540. Crude oil had a poor session yesterday. It caught me off guard. The level of sell-off we saw, but we're rebounding now, and I'm expecting a big move higher. WTI crude oil, $55.40. I think we burst through 56 before the weekend. This chart is from El Crypto Chief. Sub-Saharan Africa, to wit of Russia's hybrid model, which involves putting small amounts of mercenaries in various places in the continent. You remember I referenced Mozambique, where they've inserted a number of people. 5 Russian mercenaries are believed to have been killed alongside 20 Mozambique servicemen during an ambush in the southeastern African nation, the independent Carta de Mozambique news outlet reported Tuesday. Unconfirmed report comes a month after the reported arrival of 200 Russian mercenaries and 3 helicopters to help Mozambique's government forces fight jihadists among Moscow's wider push for influence on the continent. These are, of course, members of the Wagner group about which we just spoke. Life on the Zambezi is hard. The climate crisis is making it deadly. Is a tremendous report in Business Week. Matt Stephen Hill has written it, and Zinyange Photo has taken the photographs. For millions of people across southern Africa, the Zambezi River serves as a highway, a fishing ground, water fountain, laundromat, and swimming hole. From its source, a trickling spring in the highlands of northwestern Zambia, the river winds almost 1,700 miles through the forests of eastern Angola and along the borders with Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe before fanning out into a delta with dozens of channels in Mozambique. For Africa, climate change is not a remote prospect, it is a crisis now. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in August. Water on the upper reaches is near its lowest level in a half-century because of drought. Ironically, the most affected countries by climate change, 15 of the 20 are in Africa. Crop failures, collapse in fish stocks, a sharp drop in power from dams that provide Zambia with 80% of its electricity. In Mozambique, flooding from a pair of vicious cyclones has killed hundreds and caused billions of dollars in damage. President Lungu told assembled parliamentarians this is a very serious matter that should be not taken lightly. He mentioned climate change 44 times in his annual address to Parliament in September. There's a short video from Matt Stephen Hill on this journey that they took. Have a look at that, it's really tremendous. What the world knows as Victoria Falls is called Mosi Oa Tunya, the smoke that thunders by locals. The planet's biggest sheet of falling water is 1.2 miles wide and drops 328 feet into a chasm. At the peak of its flow around April, it churns up a mist that can be seen 30 miles away. But this year, with the water at its lowest level in more than 2 decades, there's little smoke and no thunder. Just 120 miles downstream from Kariba at Cahoro Bassa in Mozambique, the reservoir was so full the floodgates had to be opened. The rand sinks after South Africa spells out the burden of saving Eskom. Rand plummeted, bonds extended declines after investors were presented with the stark reality of what bailouts for the embattled state power utility will cost South Africa. Currency slumped 2%, the most since August, and is trading around 15, but still in that 1550, 1450 range. The yield on local currency debt due in 2026 jumped 18 basis points to 8.38%. Eskom will receive $9.4 billion in bailouts through March 2022, according to the medium-term budget policy statement released by the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. He warned that extra support may be needed if plans to turn the loss-making utility around are delayed. This means South Africa's debt will top 70% of GDP in the next 3 years and may continue rising after that as bailouts for state-owned companies boost spending. The ratio was previously projected to be at 60.2% in 2024 before decreasing in subsequent years. And as I said severally, but more recently, it seems to me that we're at a pivot moment and that we can keep regurgitating the same old mantras like a stuck record. And if we do that, this turns Ozymandias. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. 14th of October, Charlie Robertson, chief economist at Renaissance Capital, had pronounced that South Africa is heading for a junk downgrade. A meme flying around on social media is that there is a new sex position called the Ramaphosa, get on top and do nothing. South Africa's debt to GDP seen at 60.8% in 2019-2020 versus February forecast of 56.2%, so deteriorating situation. The South African All Shares up 5.95% year to date. Mahmoud, dollar rand, as I said, we're around the 15 level, but still bang in the middle of that range. We need to break 1550 for the next big move lower. I like this. Mahmoud sides après la pluie, after the rain, 1936, from the Saatchi Gallery. Very beautiful, I thought. Egyptian pound 16.16. You might criticize Al-Sisi as I do, but I must say, when it comes to the economy, he took tough decisions. He took the punch in the solar plexus, and they're reaping a reward. And I think, Egypt remains a great bet in emerging markets. EGX 30s up 11.06% year to date. Nigerian All Share down 16.29% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 13.9% year to date. King Salman received the President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, in Riyadh on the occasion of the very big investor conference. During the meeting, they discussed bilateral relations and aspects of cooperation between the two countries in various fields. David Ndii is saying President Kenyatta is looking for cash. Frank Hook tweeted Kenya tipping point. Have a look at the debt situation. The situation, obviously, we knew this was coming, but now that moment is upon us, it feels. And that again takes me back to Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Private sector credit growth has fallen below money supply growth since the interest rate cap was introduced. That's from Mir Thakkar. The Parliament will vote on whether to accept the Finance Committee's recommendations next Tuesday, said Honourable Aden Duale, Parliament's majority leader. This is the removal of the rate cap. Lawmakers have the option of removing the cap from the bill or overruling the President if 2/3 of the 349 members vote to override his position. This has triggered an enormous rally in banking stocks. World Bank says 43% of 2.87 trillion public domestic debt owed to local investors will mature in September next year. This is a huge bunching problem that's going to be in front of us. Government could face challenges in rolling over an environment with no rate cap, low subscription rates, and overexposure of banks to these assets. I've spoken about that before. It's going to be a double whammy, no doubt about it. Kenya has the lowest inflation levels in 12 years, says the Central Bank of Kenya's Deputy Governor in the Kenya Economic Update from the World Bank. The removal of VAT exemptions on petroleum products in the Finance Act 2018 yielded 14.4 billion shillings, 0.16% of GDP. Nairobi All Share has been on a roll, and it's up 10.54% year to date. The top 5 stocks this year: Longhorn Publishers up 54.88%, Kakuzi up 36.61%, NCBA Bank up 32.91%, Safaricom up 31.76%, KCB up 28.44%. NSE 20s down 8.93% year to date. Thank you kindly for stopping by.